Hello again everyone, Melth here with another Global League Advance Wars by Web match. In this match I was trying to hit the ranking of 1000, a nice satisfying round number. And the map this time is also satisfying and round. It is called Dragons in the Dark. I think it's my second favorite Global League map that I've played so far. I think it plays to the gameplay strengths of Fog of War pretty well. It's also, I would say, a somewhat deceptive map in a few ways. For one thing, it looks very big. But in actuality, the part of the map that we'll see play is quite small. Mostly just that elliptical shaped area inside the ring of woods. So a small area, and there isn't that much income to go around either. Low to medium income, smallish map. Of course, it also has a special gimmick that there are all those forests forming that ring around the map. That creates the potential for all kinds of ambushes and sneaky play of various kinds. In fact, one reason that I wanted to show this replay was because I came up with a fairly cool use of this map that I wanted to demonstrate. One other thing you might notice about the map is that there are 2 comm towers apiece. Probably to help make up for how much the defensive terrain in the forest could bog things down otherwise. One of them might look contestable, but from what I can see that doesn't happen easily. Either way, it might partly balance up the high defense of the forests, but it makes the middle of the map, where there are almost no good terrain tiles, mostly just roads, a slaughterhouse, where it's almost impossible to set up a wall of any kind. I'll talk more about the map later, for now I'll talk about the CO choices. This was a Tier 2 match. For some reason, almost all of my Global League matches have been Tier 2, actually. And this is unfortunate, because on this map, as on quite a few Fog of War maps, Olaf really dominates Tier 2. He benefits a lot from the double comm towers, all the heavy terrain really slows the enemy down during snowstorms, and global damage is of course always really powerful. And this is a shame, because I would say he's my least favorite CO in the entire game. He's just so boring. No day-to-day ability, and then his superpower is just brainless to use. You push the button and you win. Now, my opponent surprised me by picking not a Tier 2 CO, but Sonya, who is Tier 3. I wish I had known she was going to do that, because if I had known, I would not have picked Olaf. We could have had a fun Tier 3 match instead. Sonya's ability to see through forests and other vision perks and things like that are definitely a lot of fun on this map, so I highly respect my opponent's choice. My opponent this time is Axis. She is quite a good player, I think. As you can see, she plays a lot of Sammy, and some other aggressive COs too. So I was definitely expecting her to come at me with an aggressive strategy, which Sonya needs to do against Olaf because Olaf will win the long game. Sonya needs to use her fun but mostly unimpressive perks of +1 vision range and stronger counterattacks to secure a hefty early lead before Olaf can steamroll or maybe snowplow her. The problem Sonya faces is that those perks aren't that easy to apply aggressively to secure an early lead. Meanwhile, her day-to-day bad luck will hamper every single attack that she makes. Anyway, you'll see how it goes in practice. Axis and I talked a bit after this match and shared our thoughts about it, and I'll be trying to present her views on the match and mistakes that were made here as well as my own. Let's get into it. Over here in the replay viewer tool, I've decided to zoom in enough to show the important parts of the map while screening out the rows that never actually see any play anyway. Starting on day 3, you'll begin to see our strategies diverge. I am expecting Axis to play aggressively and try to claim a lot of the middle fast. So I want to get out there with at least some guys and claim at least some of those contested properties before Axis can claim them all. So whereas my infantry are moving forward toward the middle, Axis are actually going for the easy money properties instead. So in the short term, Axis will get a little bit more money than me, but in the long term I'll potentially have a better position and more money overall. That's the usual trade-off in this game between going for the immediate money properties, even if they're backward, versus going for the properties that are more contestable earlier. Crucially, of course, if you are foregoing income, you should make sure that it's not going to slow down an important vehicle for you. I'm expecting recons and tanks, so I want a tank, and this build capture order will let me get one out at a reasonable time. Axis, being player 2, can get out earlier vehicles regardless. And she is also going for the back properties first, so we'll see how she uses that short-lived financial advantage. I might add, one thing that's great about this map is just how well balanced it is for players 1 and 2. There are a lot of Global League maps these days that are quite lopsided, like 55%, 45%, or even worse than that. In any case, you can see that Axis did not actually go for any early vehicles. She's going for more of an economic start. I build my first tank this turn, because I did some math and know that if I build it this turn rather than delaying it, I can be guaranteed to get onto one of those middle cities without being blocked. We'll see what Axis builds this turn. She has enough money to get herself a tank and a recon if she wants to. Another minor divergence here is that she's going for her comm tower a bit earlier than I am. If she was getting aggressive with early recons, I would probably agree with that. But because she's not otherwise playing aggressively, I think that comm tower is not terribly useful to her. In any case, instead of building a tank, Axis builds a mech. I think this was a mistake. I like the idea of mechs, but I've mentioned a few times why I don't think they're very good in practice most of the time. Their horrible speed is not beneficial right now for a Sonya player who needs to be capturing ground from me. And the more general problem mechs have is that anytime you build one, you're building something that you know your opponent already has a swarm of counters for. So you'd better have a plan to keep your mech safe from infantry until it can attack something useful. This map's middle is too open to do that reliably. I suspect the reason she got this mech is that Sonya has an interesting synergy with mechs during her superpower turn. Her superpower gives her first strike even when she's getting attacked, which really benefits mechs a lot because they are glass cannons. Interesting, but I don't think it's worth it. As you can see, I delay my comm tower even more because I'm not going for early fighting here. I also know that I need to compensate for that slight decrease in funding that I took by moving forward instead of backward toward the more obvious properties. I think the overarching theme of this match really is knowing when you need to be the aggressor and when you don't need to be. In this matchup as Olaf, I should usually just be sitting back and letting my superpower do the winning for me. Now on my turn I drive right on into that middle city. It might seem like I took a big risk driving into the fog like that, but I did the math. I know that the fastest she could have built a tank was on turn 4. If she had done that, and if she'd driven it this way, it would have arrived just outside the city this turn. So it's impossible for there to be a tank on that city. Only a turn 3 recon could have got there. And that would have slowed down any tank builds. Now if she is next to it, then she can first strike me with her tank against my tank next turn. But number 1, she's Sonya, number 2, I have a city. So when I shoot back on my turn, I'll actually get ahead. And she can't possibly double attack me with 2 tanks. Because if she built a tank on turn 4, the next turn she could have built a tank on would be turn 6, and that couldn't arrive in time. Not before my reinforcements arrive. All of which is to say that's why I did not build my second tank where it would cover the first one. It doesn't need to, and this way can cover infantry from possible recon harassment instead. You know, I don't think I mentioned before that there are 2 airports apiece on this map. Axis will get her rear one faster than I will, but I'll get the front one faster than she will. That's a pretty good deal for me, actually. That rear airport is so far back that it really costs you a lot of time just flying away from it, so building a copter from that place early on is not really that helpful, I would say. The key advantage of the back airport is that it's a lot sneakier. The enemy can't scout it and can't block it very well. The front one is quite vulnerable, but at this stage of the game I can't be scouting either, so all that really matters is convenience of getting your copters into the action faster. Or I guess getting a T-copter from that back airport would be pretty good too, to help ferry that mech around, among other things. Anyways, you can see here my tank has done its job and scared away her recon. I think though that maybe it would have been better for her to drive eastward with the recon instead and try to harass cities in that region. Instead of just pulling it back into the forest, that is. She needs to be pushing for advantages and getting ahead of me using her day-to-day abilities. Likewise, the copter that she's building now will not show up for several more turns. So that again means a lot less momentum for Sonya during these crucial early engagements, I would say. This turn I capture all my back properties. So from here on out, my capture order switches from having a disadvantage to having an advantage. And as you can see, even though she's player 2, I'm not really that far behind in overall value. So at this stage I feel pretty good about how things are going. I'm occupying both of the middle cities and threatening to capture one of them at least, and have lots of tanks crowding into the area one by one. Next turn I can build 2 more tanks, and this turn you can see I built myself a recon in a possibly unexpected position. I had a plan. So, this turn she gets her front airport, just behind when I got mine. Her early mech is guarding her infantry, which will work out well for her. But I think it was fairly improbable that it would work out this well for her. So I'm still not convinced the mech was a great choice, even though it did work out better than it could have. This turn sees the first fight of the game with her recon harassing my infantry. She covers it with her tank, so it's not just a suicide of that recon as it might appear at first glance. But she only has 1 tank, so she rightly was not feeling too comfortable with this attack. Especially because if the recon dies, she has no one else who can finish off the capturing infantry, so I'll get the capture after all. In terms of infantry movements, you can see I think that she has a lot more infantry going toward the flanks, whereas I have more going into the middle. Which could let her either guard her own comm tower quite well, or maybe make a push for one of mine. Worth considering at least. I don't think I can agree with her build choices this turn though. Anti-airs are useful in important units, yes. But right now she must know that she has a critical shortage of tanks. Every anti-air you build is -1 tank, which is a pretty big deal in the early game. She's already down more than 2 tanks by having built that recon plus mech and having built that copter. I think she should probably have just relied upon her early copter plus her superior vision to protect her against my copters. I think that northern mech is a bit of a problem too, just because that base is so isolated that it'll take forever to reach anywhere. Maybe the idea was to defend the comm tower against vehicle harassments in case I tried to capture it myself. but I think it's worth remembering that she's the one who has an incentive to go on offense right now. I really don't particularly. And mechs are too slow to help with that. Of course, at this point during the game I didn't know any of this stuff. But I'm about to start finding things out. You might not have noticed that the water around the edges of the map are shoals, not oceans or anything like that. So although it might look like an out-of-bounds area, it's actually super easy to walk a recon over that. They act like roads. So the plan I concocted was to sneak this recon around the edge of the map and try to watch what Axis is building. It's certainly a gamble because she's Sonya and could see me coming. But it's a gamble where the downside is losing a 4,000 gold unit, not that bad, and the upside is basically winning the game. You saw how thoroughly I used my scouting intelligence on that map Misty that I played my first Global League match on. I was afraid of her attempting the same thing, but better because she's Sonya. So I had concocted a plan to walk in infantry from that southern airport to a little choke point where no recon could possibly sneak by. Meanwhile, in the middle I have plenty of tanks, so I take down the recon, and I go for the capture knowing that there are decent odds that she can't hit both it and my tank at the same time. On the left I do fall into a bit of a trap and have my tank attack her infantry, exposing it to mech fire. But at the time I really didn't feel that bad about it. After all, I've seen a mech and a recon, so I know she's down one tank compared to me, and I have some pretty good tank coverage, backing me up. By no means am I saying this is not a bad thing for me. It is, but it's not anywhere near as bad as it might look, and I wasn't too worried about it at the time either. I knew the risk when I made the move, and the mere fact that it didn't pay off this time doesn't mean it was necessarily a bad one. It also creates another target for her, away from my push into the middle. And this turn I build my own first copter. I need something to fight air units, of course, and on this map, a copter can get into position faster than an anti-air could. I also built myself a second recon. That will help make it more likely that my copter will spot and destroy her copter with a first strike instead of vice versa. So, her mech gets a first strike on my tank, which is exactly what you hope for when you build a mech, of course, so that worked out well for her. But, I lost 4,200 there, she lost 900, right? But I also did 600 to her infantry, and effectively another 1,000 by interrupting that capture. So I'm really only at negative 1,700. Again, I'm not trying to say this is a positive, I'm just trying to say it's not that big a deal, and I knew it wouldn't be that big a deal when I took the risk. She surprised me there by suiciding her infantry to interrupt my capture. That cost us each about 1,000. But it ends up slowing her down a bit more than me, because she doesn't have anybody else nearby to either keep interrupting the capture, or to capture the city that she just gave up. I think it's also worth considering that this is sort of her natural weak side, and so in the long term she'll have trouble getting infantry out this way. Right now, of course, she has a lot, but that won't last if fighting begins here. During all this, by the way, I was checking the combat numbers to make sure I knew what HP her guys were at, because that of course is hidden during the game, and also to know whether or not she had her second comm tower, and I knew at this point she did not yet have it. Now, Axis described this move, where she went for the capture with only one B-copter and tank to back her up, as a mistake. She might not be giving herself enough credit there, though. I fell into one trap that she set just last turn, after all. I might fall for another one. She and I both built artillery in this match, and I think she used hers a lot better than I used mine. In hindsight, though, maybe neither of us should have built them. The middle is way too open. Bad terrain, wide open spaces with roads where you can't build a good wall. Maybe we both should have just built more tanks. Axis does have a bit of a tank shortage right now. Speaking of tank shortages, I'm able to get that middle capture. If she'd had more tanks there, I might not have been able to. I think that very often, the strategy choice of what units you build is more consequential than the tactical choices of how you move and use them. Tactically, I've decided to concentrate my forces in the middle and the left. I'll kill her center capturer, but I know she must have had backup for it. I don't want to leave too many more tanks exposed after last turn, so I'll interrupt the capture and have a tank stand on the city so it's not left exposed to attacks. I also take out her mech, of course. Now I know I'm taking a risk fighting that close to that airport. In fact, I'd say I'm overextending and making a mistake here. It does pretty much guarantee I'll get the capture, though. I do at least have good terrain and lots of tank backup, and she is Sonya. But the fact remains that my copter is not able to guard that tank I have on the left, so that guy is pretty exposed if she has a copter of her own over there. I'm generally a proactive player, and don't like just balling my units up into one big clump together, not doing much. This formation accomplishes things while still having quite good coverage, but it's not perfect coverage, I'll admit. Tactically, I think my formation is okay, but strategically I don't need to get this aggressive, really. This turn I do get my own anti-air. You can't purely rely on copters to fight copters, of course. So on this turn, Axis made what she considered to be her biggest mistake. But I think she was right to make a decisive and aggressive move. The situation is not good for her right now. You can see that I'm actually ahead of her on income. So with me playing as the long game CO and having an income advantage, if the game goes long, I am basically certain to win. In any case, she gets a pretty good first strike on my tank on the city, so I'm glad I was on that city instead of on the road. But as she said while we were talking, she didn't cover herself with her anti-air. And she actually knows where my copter is, because she had the infantry on the mountain that revealed it. I knew that was a possibility when I moved it, of course, I just thought it was worth the risk to have the coverage. So unfortunately she's moved her copter to what she knows is range of my copter and doesn't have coverage with her anti-air anymore. But even if she was covered, it still wouldn't be that good a situation. Because even in the best case scenario for her, I would just trade her copter for copter, and then my tanks would surely kill her anti-air. So she'd end up behind about 8,000 rather than 9,000. She does keep up the aggression on the western side here, attacking my capturing infantry. Now that won't actually stop my capture, but she was probably thinking, correctly, that she needed to go onto offense here, and she does have some infantry for backup. I think building another copter is a great choice there. She knows she's about to lose one, and she also needs to reinforce that front fast. So you can see at this point that we are basically tied in unit value. And player 2 should always be substantially ahead by this point, like 10,000 or so that is not good for Axis. And I knew these rough numbers, so I was feeling pretty good at this point. I get a lot of cities, so this turn I know for sure that I have a pretty hefty income advantage. At this point I should have sat back and relaxed, but I make my own biggest mistake, or second biggest mistake. I do some scouting, see that the coast looks mostly clear, and then get aggressive with my tanks. Now it's not like I was expecting no reprisals for this, of course. But I knew I'd taken out about 2 tanks worth of her stuff and had lots of concentrated tanks of my own. So I thought this aggression would both deny her a city, and pretty much guarantee that I would get the middle one too. I'm not forming any kind of perfect defensive wall by any means here, but I am at least presenting too many targets and too much stuff in the way for her to really get to that city without sacrificing a lot of stuff to a counterattack of my own. My other thinking was that even if she does get some momentum off attacking my tanks at this point, I, as Olaf, have a tool to break any momentum that she has, my superpower. So taking a few bad trades here while boosting my economy further ahead of hers won't necessarily be that bad. Still, I think I was making a mistake. I should have played more cautiously. Oh, this turn my recon is revealed without me knowing it, by the way. I knew there was some risk of her scouting me from that mountain, but she had a person in the forest anyway. But I mean, against Sonya, there's almost no way to sneak in a position totally unseen. Against other COs, I probably would have gotten away with it. The thing is, though, even knowing about it, what is she going to do? You need to divert a lot of units to scout all those forests, find a recon in them, and attack it before it walks away again. Over on the east I made another mistake, by the way. My infantry was supposed to go into that narrow choke point of forest to prevent her from doing the same thing to me with a recon. But I forgot about that for one turn and moved due north instead. I mentioned many turns ago that Axis has a lot more infantry on the flanks than I do, and this is helping her now. She's putting a lot of infantry engagements there. But of course my infantry won me the center. At least temporarily. I did take a lot of tank damage there. But again, it's not actually that bad. I'm only behind about 0.4 tanks so far. On the left front, she gets more good infantry versus infantry attacks, but she doesn't have much vehicle support there, and again, that's kind of her weak side, so she might be overextending a bit. She gets another tank versus tank first strike, which is nice for her, but she only comes out ahead another 0.2 tanks there, so 0.6 tanks so far. So I am down 4,200 from that, but I did capture a city and deny her a city, so it could pay for itself. It was still a foolish risk on my part though, because she could have had even more tanks out there. Luckily for me, she has an artillery and anti-air instead of 2 more tanks. Speaking of which, I'm not sure I think it was great to have that anti-air reveal itself to attack a mere infantry. I'd say either attack the tank, or keep the thing secret and try to bait my copter into its range. Me knowing where it is neutralizes it and also puts it in danger, so she has to build a replacement, which means she's down another tank. You know, the other thing is that, much like with mechs, when you build an anti-air, you are building a thing that you know your opponent has a swarm of hard counters for out there. They're going to have tons of tanks, so you must have a plan to keep your anti-air safe from those tanks and get it to do its job without getting massacred first. Well, at this point, the start of turn 12, I'm in a pretty good position here. Despite being player 1 and Olaf, I'm actually ahead on value and well ahead on income. I could have and should have just sat tight, but I tried to get clever and instead did something very foolish, which was not at all worth the risk. One of my biggest weaknesses as a player, I think, is that I am by nature very aggressive, and I'm seldom satisfied with a good enough lead. I always want to get a bigger lead. Now, I'm not being blindly aggressive. Before my turn 11 moves and now on turn 12, I do scout first. I see that her airport is bare, no copters. So now I hatch kind of a half-baked idea.
We'll take them together. You're going slowly on the left.
Taking him now! No! No! No!
I think if she has no copter there, then I can do this to steal a tank that she thought was safe. But that was stupid of me, because she could easily have had a copter from her top airport, or just out of vision that she does have. Even without a copter, if she just had enough tanks to break through my flimsy wall there, this whole thing would collapse completely. This is a case where I thought, oh, wouldn't it be clever if I did such and such thing? I thought of the maneuver, thought of how elegant and effective it would be against certain things that she might or might not have, and then I fell in love with the maneuver and failed to fully think through the other things that she could have out there in the fog. Now, to my credit, if you can call it that, I realized that it had been a mistake, but it was now too late. I also made another mistake, which is I forget who I'm up against here, and I hide people in the woods. You can't hide in the woods against Sonya! My infantry are sitting ducks because of that, and I'll put a tank in a similar predicament too. It's funny because I was taking into account when it came to my recon actually, I just forgot to consider every other unit on the battlefield that would be affected by that vision boost. Luckily my strategy was strong, and my moves up until this point had been good enough that this catastrophic turn did not set me all the way back. I might have been too aggressive with my middle recon too, but this position does let it reinforce the northeastern capture that's going on. And it scouts her, and it makes it hard for her to push me off of the middle mountain. But all in all, I'd say that was one of the several too aggressive moves that I made this turn. Anyway, I do make efforts to cover my aggressively positioned people, and I build another copter because I think that my aggressively positioned one is probably going to die. I also build an artillery, but that I think was a mistake. The map is too open, as I said. First of all, she needs a little bit more power, so a few quick attacks will solve that. And the hidden copter zooms in and breaks through my wall. A devastating breakthrough, and then here comes the superpower and the massacre. It also reveals my recon over there in the west. She can't really do anything about it, but it is revealed. Again, if she was anybody but Sonya, I would have been home free at this point. This recon scouting thing is hard to stop unless you can see into woods. Anyway, she wrecks units that I thought were safe in force. My tactics were just awful this turn. But, as I've said before, strategy is more important than tactics. This was very much an avoidable setback, but it is merely a setback. My CO choice and unit build order and capture order all gave me big advantages at this point that will not easily be rolled back. Notice that northern mech has been revealed, by the way. It had to walk 3 or 4 turns slowly just to get to that position, but now I know where it is, so it's been fairly well neutralized already. Again, not too impressed with mechs on this map. And without vehicle support, her infantry are pretty well isolated on both the northeast and the southwestern fronts, and will soon be dropping like flies. She built herself a T-copter here, which is interesting. It's good, of course, for assisting mechs. It also, I think, was meant to stop me from blocking the airport, which does make some sense, of course. I think I'd say it was a pretty good idea overall. Probably not a build that she wanted to make, but one that she kind of had to make. That third anti-air on the other hand though, I don't think I can agree with that one. She already has 2 anti-air and just killed the only copter that she's seen. I think a tank would probably have been better. So, when the dust settles, I think that was pretty bad. I did the math and realized that I was now going to be slightly behind. And the bigger problem is that she now has some momentum. And I can't attack her and break that momentum, both because I'm, reeling from my losses, and also because of course she gets those first strikes this turn. But one thing I'm pretty good at in this game is manipulating superpowers. I'm pretty good about knowing when and how I can get mine and denying my opponent theirs until I want them to have it. And I can actually use her first strikes to my advantage here to get a little bit more power build up where I need it without sacrificing anything important. First of all though, I do some scouting, and move to a spot from which she is unlikely to see me. And my own infantry on the east ensures that she can't recon scout me the way I'm doing to her. So, my fresh tank attacks her injured one. Thanks to her first strike, I take a little bit more damage, which pushes me closer to my superpower. Over in the east, I knew my recon would be guaranteed to take 1 scratch damage, so that was also helpful to me. If the luck rolls had gone the way I hoped, that actually would have gotten me all the way there, but oh well. Close enough. 1 more infantry versus infantry fight will suffice. So, a super fast Winter Fury, which of course devastates her army, stops any kind of momentum, allows me to regroup, and the nice thing also is that power buildup wise it's pretty efficient to use it right now. I don't need to waste any power gauge myself or build up any that I would be giving to her possibly, I can just start recharging again next turn. She also can't really capture well with injured infantry, and we've basically both set each other's momentum back to 0, which for me as Olaf is very good. So this turn I learned my lesson, and I just start pulling back to good positions. I can harvest plenty of kills next turn while her units are out of position because they can't move around properly this time. I take a few free infantry kills where I can get them, but other than that, just don't really fight into her counter break. And because I know I have a good income lead over her, I tech up to an MD tank. I know she has to spend a lot of money on repairs, and I know that she doesn't have that much income to begin with, so she'll have a hard time matching me empty tank for empty tank. One fun thing, by the way, is that during this turn when the snow slows her down a lot, her infantry can only walk one square through force, so I know where some of them go and they can't really escape from me. So the snowshoe's on the other foot now. This time it's her infantry in the woods that are left vulnerable. Anyway, she pulls back her forces into a defensive ball, which makes some sense. But of course, she knows that I have a person on that mountain, so I can see her whole formation. Everything that she has is now pretty well exposed to me, because she couldn't push me off of that mountain this turn. I'm getting a pretty good intel lead at this point, between my recon and my mountain control. Her T-copter turn was completely ruined by the snow, as I knew it would be. It could otherwise have been pretty efficient getting into position to help out Max or things like that. Anyway, she keeps pulling back, which means no power buildup is wasted for me during this turn where I can't get any. So at this point, to be honest, the game had already been decided. I had a big income lead, a big value lead, a stronger CO, and my recon will now be in position to start watching most of what Axis produces. There are certainly still some cool maneuvers left to see though. So my recon is now positioned where it can scout a base and an airport and watch anything that flies conveniently out of the other airport. Next turn will be in a perfect spot. I hunt down some of the infantry whose locations I knew, and I'd been keeping good track of HP, so I knew how badly injured this one was too. Likewise, I know that two of the people pushing on my comm tower are at 1 HP, and I know they have no support, so they're all dead if I can just find them. I start by killing the one that I can see. I've had good vision across the center, so I know where her tanks are and where they aren't. I'm also setting myself up to once again interrupt her capture on that city. I did sacrifice a lot to keep her from getting that thing, but with the exception of the turn 12 fiasco, it really worked out quite well and was worth it. In hindsight, maybe the infantry went after my comm tower should instead have gone to finish that capture earlier. In the middle, I'm starting to realize that it's too open to really wall for my artillery very well, but I can see everything that she has, so I know what she can and can't get to this turn at least. Other than that, I mostly just consolidate my forces back toward the middle. I know that her forces are there, but they're split into two different groups. I'm content to hold my ground, and I expect she'll just spend this turn regrouping anyway. And I get another MD tank this turn. Again, I know that she can't take up as well as I can, so this will give me a big advantage. Alright, Axis' turn, working on those captures, getting quite close. She does kill my infantry, but only by suiciding a stronger one to a recon. In hindsight, I think she lost a fair number of guys to infantry suicides like that. The bigger problem though I think is the anti-air. That anti-air is going to die to just slow down one capture. Axis builds up a good wall, and she invests considerable resources, including a B-copter and suiciding an infantry, to push me off that mountain and blind me. That is definitely smart before doing the rest of her moves. But I am willing to sacrifice an infantry for vision on a key turn if I need to. Another example of having too many anti-airs. This one is basically just wall for the artillery. The goal, of course, is to push me off of that city, which does make sense as a goal, of course, but at this point she doesn't really have the resources to accomplish it. I would also say that although I can't see it, I know where the artillery is right now. Putting the anti-air there just as a wall made it clear what's behind it. She builds a fourth anti-air, I guess anticipating that current ones will die, but I only have one copter. One reason that I built so few is that I've had a good eye on her airports, and I know that she hasn't built many copters, so there's not that much for mine to fight. I mean, they're good against tanks, of course. On the right, I continue to be paranoid about possible recon shenanigans of her own. Likewise, on the left, I continue to search and destroy her infantry. In a few turns, I might be able to counter-push on her cities. That is my strong side, after all. Now, I've just killed two anti-airs, so I thought, what are the odds that she has a third anti-air? Now, she does have one, but honestly, when I saw that, I wasn't even that unhappy to see it. Because I'm losing one copter, and she's losing two anti-airs and a copter. I'm happy to keep making trades like that. Oh, what you're seeing here is a glitch in the replay viewer, by the way. My infantry moved up to scout the forest, which is why my tank can attack the artillery there. As I said, the fact that she built that wall there told me that's where the artillery had to be. Anyway, my MD tank moves in to defend my other units while staying hopefully hidden. When you build something slow and heavy like an MD tank, it's important to remember that there will often be a turn where you're kind of weaker than you would have been before it shows up, but the snow helped cover for some of that weakness. My artillery's position here is not great, and I know it, but it has enough coverage that I know she can't attack it without taking heavier losses. Now you might think it's weird that I'm building an anti-air, even though I can see both of her airports and I know that she hasn't produced any air units recently. But I'm thinking a few turns ahead. Number 1, when she sees my double MD tank, she might well want to build a bomber. Number 2, I'm actually very close to being able to lock her southern airport. If I just move my anti-air for one turn, I can then go 2, 4, 6, and locked. That's a high reward maneuver, but it's also a risky position, so I want to have a backup in case something goes wrong. Alright, so Axis gets some good strikes this turn, but she took even heavier losses and is less able to replace them. I made all these attacks knowing that the units doing them could die, but even if they did, it would still be worthwhile to me. And I also now can see what is coming up as reinforcements from one of her bases, which is a crucial advantage. And I have good coverage for my units, so these attacks that Axis is doing will lead to counterattacks too. To take out half an artillery, she'll lose 7/10 of a tank. Not a good trade. Of course, my trade against her artillery wasn't that good either. Artillery make great people bait. In Advance Wars 1, APCs famously were really good bait for the AI. They would drop everything to attack them, no matter how risky it was. Artillery kind of worked like that against human players. They are very tempting and good to attack, but you shouldn't sacrifice too much for it. From her T-copter movement, I deduced that she was probably building a mech this turn. That, plus the tank that I can see she built, means she didn't have much money left over. At most, she built a tank up north, but actually she's just saving it. That's inflating my value lead a little bit, but you can see it's definitely big and growing turn by turn. I'm moving pretty methodically, just hunting down infantry. All those attackers who hit my lines get slammed. I'm threatening now to capture that neutral city that should be hers. I don't expect to get it, so much as just to force her into more cost-ineffective engagements. I put a sacrificial infantry on top of that mountain to see where her artillery is, so I know that it doesn't cover the anti-air. So my MD tank makes a great debut, and I keep rotating tanks back to get some repairs. It's definitely been something of a brawl in the middle, so lots of injured units that need help. And getting repairs done near the front is like having tiny 1/5 quality factories there. Pretty good. In the east, I'm steadily advancing my anti-recon search party once I've verified that each area is clear. That 3-space wide patch of forest is very hard to clear with certainty, but I'm pretty confident now that it's empty. I think the map would be a bit better if there were no 3 square wide patches of woods, just 2 at the most. In any case, in the middle I just consolidate my forces. I'm pretty confident that Northeast City is unguarded now. If she threw away an anti-air just to interrupt me before, she doesn't have much else in the area. But I'm short on infantry in that area too, so I built my own T-copter to help bring more in. A T-copter would be great support for pushing on our comm tower next. And sadly, in the northwest, my recon must pull back to be out of counter-break vision range. Have to pull back for 2 turns, in fact. Because of course she'll still have enhanced vision during my turn. She does get some great intel about what is and is not in various forests, though. Playing Sonya on this map definitely looks like fun. That mech versus infantry fight worked out surprisingly well for her, but still not really what you want a mech to be doing. She probably should have gone for my tank in the woods instead of attacking my infantry. Doesn't make a big difference though. Once again, very intelligently, she blinds me and then walls up. She's got a lot of mechs in the middle, but not really much else. She also does a double base cap that I didn't know about to afford that bomber. I don't know about any of that because I had to pull the recon back for safety. But as far as she knows, she probably thinks that I know about that bomber. And I think that's why she didn't try to keep it hidden next turn. Mind you, I had correctly predicted that bomber a few turns in advance and built the anti-air to be ready for it. Bombers are another one of those units that benefit a lot from Sonya's superpower. Because if an anti-air gets first striked by a bomber, the anti-air is blown away, often instant killed. In any case, there aren't that many things that want to attack this turn anyway, so the counter portion of counterbreak didn't end up mattering all that much either way. My T-copter will do a bit of a boost here, then ferry an infantry full distance next turn. That transport feature is something that I love about Advance Wars by Web. It's so much fun and feels so tactical. Once again, I scout to find where the artillery is and find out where is safe and not safe for MD tanks to attack. In the southwest, I know that I've killed all the infantry that I ever saw, so I'm comfortable making a push at this point. And I know logically where, if she has an anti-air, it has to be, so my B-copter is safe to do this attack as long as I wall for it, so that's what I do, just wall it off with MD tanks. Sonya mechs do not do well against MD tanks that are on cities, so she can't really attack into that. I do build another artillery. I think again that was probably a mistake. They're not that useful here. So here Axis reveals the bomber to me. Now again, she probably already thought that my recon saw it and therefore I already knew where it was, but that was not actually the case here. Axis will be sacrificing another anti-air to blind me. I guess she is covering it with the bomber, as far as she knows. The bomber was definitely a solid choice, even though she did have the base skip for it. But my mountain infantry has really been effective bait turn after turn, luring in lots of units to their deaths. Anyway, Axis goes ahead and builds herself a pretty nice defensive formation here, I would say. About the best that's possible with these limited resources left. However, I see an opportunity here. Like before, if I do the right attacks, I can get my superpower out. Her bomber is currently covering a lot, but if its movement was halved from 7 to 3, it wouldn't be covering much of anything. In fact, a lot of her coverage will drop to basically 0. So I've got a plan. First of all, I'll just grab that city to expand my income lead. I get back into my scouting position and see, oh hey, there's a battlecopter. That's interesting. I can counter that with a blizzard too, and move into airport lock. So I reveal that tank while also getting some repairs. Now the obvious thing to do would be to have my copter attack first. But if I do that, I won't get Winter Fury out as efficiently for other fights. So instead I attack with my tank first to take some extra damage and build up some extra power. Before this, of course, I did all the math to find out what the possible range of damage I would deal and take is, and therefore how much power buildup I would get. Sonya's luck variance makes that less predictable, so a bit of a nuisance, but oh well. Anyway, I can charge right into what I know will not actually be bomber range. I shoot the T-copter as the least important target that would still give me some power. The dice rolls didn't work out, so my infantry had to attack the next two, but oh well. Here we go, a second Winter Fury. Devastating. The bomber now covers nothing, the copter can only interrupt the capture from the north, which I can hit back at. I can then block up her airport, I can threaten her bomber next turn. Her artillery can get a hit on me, but it's damaged, so it won't really hurt me that badly. My T-copter boosts people along, I'll be threatening her comm tower next turn. Way ahead on income, way ahead on unit count, way ahead on value, everything. To be honest, the one thing I didn't like about how this game went was that it had been effectively over back on turn 13. That was just 5 turns ago, but it was about a real-life month ago. I was waiting for quite a few consecutive 7-day turns. That's kind of a problem with Advance Wars by Web, I think. Anyway, I thought it was a pretty fun game. Axis was a fun and skilled opponent. I think tactically she played at least as well as I did. She was fighting against a big CO disadvantage though. I do wish I'd known she'd be picking Sonya so I could play somebody a little bit weaker than Olaf. I think the two things that helped me the very most though were my unit choices and doing good scouting and deductions based on scouting. And I might say that one thing we had in common is that neither of us chose the right times to attack. I think Axis was too defensive in the beginning for this matchup, and I was way too aggressive in the middle. I'll try to learn from that and do better next time. Until then, have a great day everyone.